All traditional diets contained some animal foods. Now, this was Dr. Price's greatest disappointment. As he traveled over the world, he was hoping to find healthy traditional cultures that only had plant foods in their diet. And he did not find this.
From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
Hey, Hilda here. This is episode 236, and our guest today is Fallon Morell. Sally is the president of the Weston A. Price Foundation, and she is a popular speaker and prolific author. She's written Nourishing Traditions, Nourishing Broth, Nourishing Fats, Nourishing Diets. Needless to say, she understands how to nourish well. Today, Sally discusses the importance of animal products in our diet. In this conversation, Sally explains why animal products are so critical for our health and how indigenous people groups worldwide would go to great lengths to obtain it, especially to provide for those in the childbearing years. She covers what happens to our bodies when we don't get enough animal products, including issues with tooth decay, weight gain or loss, and more. And she talks about the dangers of vitamin B12 deficiencies, how to best source meat for our families, and the morality or ethics of eating meat in the first place. In essence, this episode is a review of principle number 2 of the Wise Traditions lifestyle, that all traditional cultures included animal products in their diet. We reached back into our archives for this episode. It originally aired in May 2016. Enjoy! And before we get into it, a quick reminder, the Weston A. Price Foundation has 12 trifold brochures that cover a variety of topics from myths and truths about soy, nutrition for mental health, butter is better, the dangers of vegan and vegetarian diets, sugar alert, and more. These are great resources for your family and to share with friends. Get our trifold pack, one of each brochure, for only $3 on our website under the Order Materials button on our homepage, and the link is in the show notes. And this episode is brought to you in part by Grass-Fed Thymus by Ancestral Supplements. Ancestral Supplements makes New Zealand-sourced nose-to-tail organ meats, bone marrow, and thymus in simple, convenient gelatin capsules. Based on the ancient wisdom of like supports like, consuming thymus may strengthen and support our own thymus. Find out how thymus may help manage allergies and support immune health, which is so important these days. Visit ancestralsupplements.com to see what they can do for you. Ancestral Supplements, putting back in what the modern world has left out. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Sally.
Well, thank you, Hilda. It's great to be back. It's just such a wonderful series of podcasts you're doing.
I'm excited today because we're doing principle number 2 from the principles that are the bedrock of the Foundation's diet.
Yes, but the Weston A. Price Foundation has 11 dietary principles. And the first 3 and the last one were formulated by Dr. Price. The others were principles that we've added based on research that came after Dr. Price.
I see. And so what is principle number 2?
All traditional diets contained some animal foods. Now, this was Dr. Price's greatest disappointment. As he traveled over the world, he was hoping to find healthy traditional cultures that only had plant foods in their diet. And he did not find this. And he was humble enough to admit this and to say, this is what I'd hoped to find, but everywhere I went, people ate animal foods. And they went to a lot of trouble and even risk to get the animal foods. Now, there was a lot of variety in the amount of animal foods they ate. For example, the people in Alaska, their diet was 99% animal foods, whereas some of the people in Africa, their diet was only 10% animal food. So there's a big range of levels of animal foods in traditional diets, but all of them had some.
Interesting. So he was disappointed because he thought he would find some people groups that ate no animal products whatsoever.
Exactly. And in fact, all of these cultures had sacred foods, foods that were considered very important to prepare for pregnancy for both men and women, and then to consume while pregnant, lactating in them when the children were growing during this period of preparation for pregnancy and while the child is growing, when that body is being formed. Because you can't go back later and reform the body. It's when you get to puberty, it's pretty much set. And all of those foods were animal foods. None of them were plant foods. So all of the sacred nutrient-dense foods that they valued for creating healthy children, those were all animal foods.
That's really important for our listeners to hear, especially those who are in the childbearing years.
Yes. We are very concerned about how hip it is and cool and to be vegetarians. And this is being promoted to young women. And this is a terrible thing to do. Now, I'm not saying that at some point in your life you can't be a vegetarian or a vegan. In fact, in traditional cultures, you often found that people fasted or didn't eat animal foods, but it was for a short period of time as a penance or as a cleansing or whatever. Some people are drawn to vegetarianism at the end of their life. I don't have any argument with this. What I have an argument with is promoting a plant-based diet for women, for people who are going to have children, because it is not fair to that child. The child will not get off to a good start in life, and I'm not just pulling that out of thin air. We have studies showing that children who are brought up on diets with plant foods and also, I should say, very little fat, they don't grow as well, they have poor bone structure, they don't do as well in school, they don't do as well intellectually. That is not fair. It is not fair to a child to impose that belief on them during that formative time.
Sally, where can people find these studies?
Well, the Lonergan studies were the ones that I'm referring to. We have them in our articles on the website, and I'm coming out with a new book, Nourishing Fats. It'll be out January 2017, that talks about this for children.
What about a child who reads a book or is exposed to something and says to their parent, I don't want to eat meat right now? Is there a responsible way to approach that?
The responsible way is you're going to eat meat. There's some things I think that children should be left alone on. I think children should be left alone to play and explore, and parents shouldn't be hovering over them all the time. But I really am very emphatic about this. Parents should control what their children eat, because it is just not fair to that child to set them loose in this world of junk food, or in this world of a lot of competing food philosophies, most of which are not based on sound science, and then they find out when it's too late, when they become adults and they have all these health problems. And I've there's so many articles in the papers about how the child wants to be a vegetarian, and these quote unquote good parents are going to respect this. And no, if that were to happen in my family, you eat what mom fixes you. That's the rule.
Well, and I think most of us realize that we're in charge as parents when it comes to bedtime or whatever it is. A bad friendship will tell the child, no, you can't play with John anymore. Yeah. So why wouldn't we direct them when it comes to meals?
Yes. And I think that's one of the most important things that parents do, is create a structure of a meal schedule that is expected, that they know they're going to have breakfast, that mom's going to make them lunch. They know that there's going to be a dinner where the family is all together, and that food is good, healthy, nutritious food, and there should be some animal foods in that food. Now, I'm not saying that every night you have to have a great big steak. Mm-hmm.
Although that sounds pretty good to some of us.
But you do need some animal foods in the diet. It's just absolutely.
So when you're talking about having animal foods, where do we get that meat? Should I just go to Safeway or Giant and pick up a special on pork chops?
Well, for some people, that's their only choice. And I don't like for us to be so strict or so even elitist that we're telling people you have to have, pasture-raised pork chops created by virgins underwater. No, that's not what we're saying. You do the best you can with the resources available to you, the time you have, and the money you have, because let's face it, some people can't afford anything but the supermarket. In the supermarket, the best, cleanest animal foods are the red meat, the beef and the lamb. I know that the way it's raised in this country is not ideal, but at least beef starts out on pasture in this country for the first 6 months of life. So beef is good. Eggs are good. I mean, they're not ideal in the supermarket, but it's still a good food. Cheese is a great food to feed your family. Seafood. The healthiest people, Dr. Price has studied, ate seafood. So you can do it. You know, one of the best foods in the market is calf's liver. It's not expensive. It's the most nutrient-dense food you can buy. And serve your family calf's liver once a week. You know, there's a meal that just costs a few dollars, and you are getting so much nutrition.
Yeah, the organ meats have more in them than the muscle meats.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Do you have a recipe for calf's liver in your Nourishing Traditions cookbook?
I do, and also in all the other books I've done, there's always recipes for liver. So, yeah.
Some of us are a little scared
I know
about that. So we need all the help we can get.
If you start them young, and of course the first two foods that we recommend for weaning babies are egg yolk and pureed liver, especially chicken liver or poultry liver. We recommend these foods for moms when they're pregnant and nursing. These are the nutrient-dense foods that support, healthy growth. And
what are some of the nutrients that are in those foods?
Right. So the real question is, well, why? What's wrong with a plant-based diet? And the reason is that you are going to be missing critical nutrients, starting with the fat-soluble vitamins A, D, and K. And I could just hear the listeners saying, well, I can get vitamin A from carrots. No, you can't. What's in carrots and leafy green vegetables are the precursors, the carotenes. These are converted to true vitamin A with great difficulty by humans. Some humans can't do it at all. Half of all women in the world can't make this conversion. And it's more difficult when you're pregnant, and children and babies can't make this conversion. You need the true vitamin A from the animal foods. So vitamin A, vitamin D, yes, you can get vitamin D from the sun. Are you going to go out in the sun and sunbathe in December? No, okay. And then vitamin K, again, there's a plant type and an animal type of vitamin K. And the animal type is much more effective in the body. It's 10 times more efficacious in your body. So the fat-soluble vitamins A, D, and K. Iron and zinc are two nutrients that are very difficult to get from plant foods. And you don't want your baby or your child to be deficient in zinc, because zinc you need for mental development and for cognitive thinking. Iron deficiency is very serious in a growing child and can result in mental retardation. So iron and zinc, the fat-soluble vitamins, complete protein. Again, you can get some protein from plant foods, but it's not enough. You definitely need the complete protein from the animal foods.
Do you think one reason we're seeing a rise in mental issues and behavioral problems have to do with the lack of animal products in the diet?
I think in some cases, yes. Certainly it's almost like, you put it another way, with too many carbohydrates in the diet, especially refined carbohydrates, which is often what takes the place of the animal foods. I remember my boys in high school when they had nutrition classes and they had to keep food diaries.
Uh-huh.
And one of my boys said, "Mom, all these girls are eating is soy and sugar because they're vegetarians." And I said, "Yes." And I said, it's a tragedy when they try to have children. It's going to be very difficult for them.
Oh, and fertility is such an issue in our nation right now.
Yes, it is.
So you would recommend increasing animal products, but it doesn't mean more meat necessarily. You were mentioning eggs and cheese.
Eggs and cheese. Butter, of course. The animal fats are very important. It could be seafood. Of course, we recommend people take cod liver oil for their A and D. And also, there's some very special fats in the animal foods that we don't get from the plant foods. The omega-3 fatty acids in seafood, DHA and EPA. But there's also very important omega-6 fatty acid that we get from land-based animal foods, meat and butter and eggs, and that's arachidonic acid. And that is a critical nutrient for gut health, for healthy skin, for our brains. And again, we get that from animal foods.
Sally, I know a lot of people want to avoid meat because they don't like the conditions in which animals are raised. Their hearts go out to them. They feel like, I'm very concerned about the environment and about these animals' welfare. So that's one reason they decide to stay away from meat. What would you say to them?
Well, I can understand their concerns, and we all have those concerns, and no organization more than the Weston A. Price Foundation, because we have a whole chapter system set up to help people find humanely raised animal foods. So it's going to take all of us to change this system, all of us demanding humanely raised animal foods. And of course, humanely raised means they're raised in a healthy way, and it's healthier for us too. And there's also this idea that you don't want to kill anything for your own sake. Well, you kill animals no matter what food you eat. They estimate that you have to kill 300 animals per acre to raise grain. And often these animals are killed in really gruesome ways. You only have to kill one animal per acre for beef.
What do you mean? Can you explain that? I don't get it.
Oh, because when you clear the fields and you use pesticides and traps and all these things because you don't want rabbits eating the lettuce, and you don't want animals eating the grain. So they fumigate and they get rid of all the animals in the agriculture. So you're still killing animals, whatever you're eating.
And Joel Salatin told me recently, for anything to live, something has to die.
Yes.
That's the way of nature.
Yes. And I'll tell you a beautiful story. We got a letter from a gal who was in a group that ate buffalo. And they were like a CSA for buffalo. And the night before they slaughtered a buffalo, everyone got an email saying, say a prayer for the buffalo that's going to the butcher tomorrow. And then when the farmer who was raising the buffalo would go out to the pasture where the buffalo were, always on the morning that one was going to the butcher, there would be one standing apart and waiting to go. He was ready to go. That's what the animals are for. That's their purpose in life, is to give themselves to us. So we printed this letter, and then we got a letter the next issue from someone who'd been raised on a farm, and she said every fall they would have a serious, solemn meeting around the kitchen table, and they would vote on the animal that they were going to kill for their food for the winter. And all the animals had names, so they would vote on the different animals. And she said always the next morning the animal that they voted on was standing apart and ready to go.
Oh my gosh, that makes me want to cry.
Yeah.
How
you
moving.
see how connected we are to the animals. And, our Native American ancestors or traditional ancestors, they were in a kind of symbiosis with those animals, and the animals knew what their role was. Their role is to serve us. Of course, our role is to treat them well, but their role is to actually be a sacrifice for us, and that's what these stories tell us.
Coming up, Sally tells a surprising incident on a farm in Holland. And she also goes into what happens to our bodies if we avoid animal products altogether.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions podcast from the Weston A. Price Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
White Oak Pastures. White Oak Pastures is the only farm in the United States with scientific data proving our regenerative farming practices are producing carbon-negative products. Our cattle sequester more carbon than they emit in their entire lives, which means that as a consumer, you can fight climate change by shopping at whiteoakpastures.com. We pasture raise and hand butcher 10 species of livestock, which can be shipped directly from our farm to your door. So vote with your dollars for a production system that is good for the animals, good for the soil, and good for rural communities like Bluffton, Georgia. You guys, I have been to White Oak Pastures, and I can personally vouch for their quality and integrity. So shop for your meats, poultry, tallow skin products, pet chews, and leather crafts at whiteoakpastures.com. And this episode is brought to you in part by Grass-Fed Thymus by Ancestral Supplements. Ancestral Supplements makes New Zealand-sourced, nose-to-tail organ meats, bone marrow, and thymus in simple, convenient gelatin capsules. Based on the ancient wisdom of like supports like, consuming thymus may strengthen and support our own thymus. Just in time for allergy season, support your thymus this spring with unique peptides such as thymosin, thymopiatin, and serum thymic factor to regulate, strengthen, and support immune health. And listen to this. Thymic extracts have been shown to normalize and modulate the ratio of T helper cells to suppressor cells, whether the ratio is low, as in chronic infections and cancer, or high, as in allergies and autoimmune diseases like psoriasis and rheumatoid arthritis. In other words, thymic factors appear to balance the immune response up or down as needed. So visit ancestralsupplements.com to see what they can do for you. Ancestral Supplements, putting back in what the modern world has left out. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions.
And I'll tell you one more story.
Yeah, I want to hear.
I was in Holland and visiting a dairy. He said when the cow gets too old to produce milk, they put her in a pen aside, and a couple days later the truck comes to take her to the abattoir. And he said always the night before, he goes and talks to the animal and thanks the animal. And she goes off very quietly the next day. And so one night he did this to the animal ready to go, and for some reason the truck didn't come, and didn't come for several weeks. And that animal was uncontrollable. He said we couldn't do anything with her. She was ready to go, and nobody came for her.
Oh.
So I think there's a lot more awareness in the animals of what their role is in life.
They're sentient beings.
They're sentient beings.
And they can sense, like you said, that relationship.
This is their
and what
time.
Their purpose is.
Yes.
You have your own farm now.
Yes.
And so how does this play out for you, seeing these animals that you're raising to be eaten by people?
You know, I think anyone who thinks that we shouldn't be killing animals needs to pay the feed bill for an animal that's just sitting around with no purpose. You have to be very practical on a farm. A dairy cow that's not producing anymore, you can't just keep feeding her. You'd end up with a whole farm full of non-productive cows. Same with the chickens. They all need to be fed. And if you're not feeding them, well, you can either give them a quick death and then they'll be useful to you, or you can just leave them out to starve to death.
Or for the foxes.
Or for the foxes or the hawks. And that's not very pretty and not a good way for them to die.
What are some of the health problems that come from not following this principle, from avoiding animal products?
Well, of course, we hear from people all the time who were vegans or vegetarians, and it's a pretty similar story from everyone. The first thing that happens is they get tooth decay, often rampant tooth decay. They get fatigue. A lot of them report gaining weight or getting too thin. You can't keep the right weight on them. One of the most serious is mental illness. And Chris Masterjohn has talked about this in his articles, so I can say this. He was a vegan, and he developed decay in all his teeth. But he said he developed paranoia. He got so paranoid he couldn't even get out of the car. And this is the problem of B12 deficiency. B12 deficiency, you can get B12 deficiency even if you are eating meat, but it's, of course, much more common in people who are not eating animal foods. And B12 deficiency is very serious. It first manifests as psychiatric disorders such as obsessive compulsive behavior, depression. If it goes on too long, you get serious diseases like anemia, multiple sclerosis, cancer, heart disease. And if you're B12 deficient for too long, the effects are irreversible. You can't go back just starting to eat a lot of meat and reverse the effects of B12 deficiency. So this is a very serious deficiency, and one, of course, that comes with not eating animal foods. Now, one interesting thing is that in the old days, before we had all the good sanitation and so forth, our food was full of insect parts. The grains were full of insect parts and insect poop, which are very rich in B12. So we got a lot more B12 from the plant foods we were eating than we do today.
That's one of those unintended consequences when we think, oh, the pesticides will eliminate the bugs.
Yes.
Not realizing that not only hurts the ecology on a big scale, but personally it's affecting us because we're not eating the insect parts.
Yes, right. And they're microscopic. You only see them through the microscope. But you would be shocked to look through the microscope at rice or chocolate, for example. I think that's why a lot of people crave chocolate. Because they need those insect parts.
And they don't even know it. When you were listing all of the problems that come with B12 deficiency, it sounded like you were listing the epidemics, the concerns we have in the U.S. today.
Yes. And, I think it's a total waste to test people's cholesterol. It has no correlation with heart disease, and actually low cholesterol is a marker for cancer. Our cholesterol is the level that the body needs it to be. If we're under a lot of stress, we need to make more cholesterol. If different people need more or less cholesterol. But what we really should be testing for, starting about age 40, is B12. Everyone should be tested for B12. So we can catch the, beginning deficiencies. Elderly tend to be much more deficient in B12. And this is what we need to be looking at. Not cholesterol, but B12 deficiency.
What would you say to someone who says, well, I can just buy vitamin B from the store. I don't need to eat animal products.
Well, that is an admission that this is not a natural diet. I mean, they didn't have B12 tablets then. And yes, that's better than nothing. If you really insist on being a vegan, you definitely need to take B12, and I think all of them know that. Mm-hmm. But there's so many other nutrients that you need to get from the animal foods. I need to say one more thing, and that is this argument that if you're a vegetarian, you're more spiritual. And it's a very malicious argument, I think, because it kind of engenders a spiritual pride in people. And my counter to that is the spiritual diet is the diet that keeps you healthy. Because all of us have a very important work to do while we're on the planet. We don't have much time here. And we actually came into embodiment knowing subconsciously what we had to do to make the world a better place. And if you're not healthy, you can't do that work. So the spiritual diet is the diet that keeps you healthy. It keeps you from being a burden on others. That helps you think clearly. That keeps you from having psychological problems. And that allows you to do whatever work it is that you're supposed to do in your lifetime.
And food taken with gratitude. The scenes you were mentioning earlier, thanking an animal, thanking the one who gave him to you, is a very spiritual practice.
Yes, we should always give thanks. But I think it's almost like if you're a vegetarian or a vegan, you're saying, no thanks. I don't accept the way the physical world is organized. I don't like that. I'm going to be above all that. But we can't be above it. We are in the physical world. We're enmeshed in the physical world.
Whether we like it or not.
Whether we like it or not. And
sometimes
I think
we don't like it.
We need to eat the diet of being in the physical world. That people point to the Bible and the Garden of Eden. They had just ate the seeds and the fruits and so forth. Well, that was the Garden of Eden. That was a very different environment. And then the expulsion from the Garden of Eden, we got the clothes of skin. And then we had a different diet, it's a different dispensation. And we had a diet that included the animal foods, big time. Lots of meat. And that's because we have physical bodies.
Right.
Now, if we get to a stage where we don't have physical bodies anymore, maybe we won't need the animal foods. Maybe we won't need any food. But here on Earth, we need to take responsibility for our health and eat a diet that sustains the physical body.
Good point. Okay, so let's say you've convinced me. I know I need more animal products in my diet. What do I do? You said the grocery store isn't bad, but are there ways to go around that and maybe get an upgrade to the animal products I'm eating?
Yes, and that's why we have our local chapter system. The local chapters, we have almost 600 worldwide,
wow.
And every local chapter keeps a food resource list of what's available locally. So anyone can contact that chapter leader. She'll probably have it right on her website, or she can email it to you, where the farms are, where the stores that are selling the good meat. And of course, where to get raw milk, which is a wonderful animal food. If you don't want to eat red meat, raw milk, raw cheese, raw dairy products, good eggs, and hopefully some seafood. A lot of people do just fine on that kind of diet. But contact your local chapter leader and they can help put you in touch with a farmer or a food group or a CSA or whatever.
That's right. You can just go to the westonaprice.org website and click on Find a Local Chapter.
Yes.
And then get all the help. So you don't have to be a member, but if you're a member, you do get benefits like the journal, and you get involved. You find out about activities and events that we have going on, and can reap all kinds of benefits and support the podcast. This is just a little aside. But Sally, I wanted to ask you, because a friend of mine said to me recently, when I eat meat, it just doesn't sit well with me.
I'm so glad you asked that question, because one of the things we pride ourselves on at the Weston A. Price Foundation is telling you how to eat. And a lot of people have trouble with meat. Now, that could be lack of digestive enzymes, lack of hydrochloric acids. People on low-salt diets, for example, don't make enough hydrochloric acid, so you may need to take an hydrochloric acid supplement. Another thing that really helps with eating meat is to eat it with broth. And now think of this. There are two types of protein in an animal. There's the meat proteins, and then there's the collagen proteins. And you need both types of protein. They need to be in balance. So when you make a gravy with broth, or put your meat in a soup or a stew with broth, you're getting that balance of proteins. You get the glycine to balance the methionine, and so forth. And so that's a very important thing to do.
Oh, I'm so glad you mentioned that. I'll tell my friend to listen.
And make sure that the meat you're eating has the fat on it. If it's too lean, put butter on it. Make a béarnaise sauce, or always you eat the proteins with the fats. So full-fat milk, you eat eggs, you eat the yolks and the eggs, full-fat cheese, and meat with the fat, and chicken with the skin and the fat.
Oh, and it tastes better that way,
yes,
too.
Yes.
I love it. So as we prepare to wrap up, what advice would you give the listener? What's one thing they could do to improve their health?
Well, eat nutrient-dense foods. Eat good quality animal foods, and particularly organ meats. Learn to eat organ meats. I know it's a challenge for lots of people. And try to get off the empty foods. So the sugars, the white flour, the vegetable oils. The vegetable oils are empty foods. And the foods with all the additives and everything. So make sure what you're eating is actually feeding your body and not just filling your stomach.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for this time today, Sally.
Thank you for having me.
Our guest today was Sally Fallon Morell. Check out her blog at nourishingtraditions.com. And I'm Hilda Labrada Gore. Follow me on Instagram at Holistic Hilda. And for the show notes for this and every podcast episode, just visit our website, westonaprice.org, and go to the podcast page. And that's it. Thank you so much for listening. Stay well, my friend, and see you next time.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.